Welcome to this special edition of Your Voice, Your Vote. Marijuana activists want you to vote on whether to legalize the drug, and they want you to do it sooner rather than later. They plan to have an initiative on the November ballot in 2014. Currently, there are several bills in the state legislature dealing with marijuana. However, the most pertinent is the one that would legalize, regulate, and tax marijuana. The bill probably won't make it out of committee. So the pro-marijuana folks say if the legislature doesn't act, they will. My guest today is Paul Stanford, who was the sponsor of last year's marijuana measure that failed. And you just began the legal process of getting a measure on the ballot for next year. Why so imperative to get it on the ballot so soon, Paul?
Well, we realize that the summer's coming very quickly, and that's the best season to petition. It's a lot easier to gather signatures the year prior to the initiative deadline, which is next July. So it's better and cheaper for us to do it this year. And we want to urge the legislature to pass House Bill 3371. And if they do, or if they refer it to the people for a vote, as some legislators favor, then we don't have to put the initiative on the ballot. We'll support what the Oregon legislature's done. And in fact, our newspaper, The Oregonian, has endorsed and said that's what the legislature should do.
Do you think you'll have everything done, everything ready to go to have it on the ballot in November?
Yes, yeah, I do. I think if the legislature doesn't act and put this on the ballot, then we're going to put two initiatives on the ballot, one constitutional amendment and one statutory measure to tax and regulate marijuana to adults.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that as well coming up. Some state lawmakers say this is not something we should rush into. Representative Andy Olson is opposed to House Bill 3371. That's the bill we mentioned earlier, and he's against an initiative petition. He thinks lawmakers really need to study this issue first. Listen to this.
I don't believe right now Oregon's ready to move forward with the policy discussion as it applies toward what 3371 represents. And that bill in itself creates the issue of dispensaries and with the attempt of trying to control more. I would not move forward with anything right now during this session, especially an initiative petition toward this. I would let the legislature have a work group together from this when the session's over here, and then move forward with something that would work toward protecting people who need to have marijuana along the medical marijuana side, but also at the same time deal with those who are abusing it right now.
He's saying give the legislature more time. And don't you think, Paul, that maybe a bill from the legislature would have more clout with the voters than a citizens'
Well, it certainly
initiative?
would, and that's why we support a referral to the people by the legislature. And if they don't do it this July, then there's a short session next February, and we're hopeful that they'll do it then. If they do, then we don't need to go forward and put this on the ballot. But we want to be prepared if they don't, because we think the people are ready to vote on this. We just did a poll that showed that 63% of Oregonian voters, likely voters, are supporting taxing and regulating marijuana. The vote in Washington last November, 6 months ago, has changed the whole dynamic. Now, half the state is within an hour's drive of the Washington border, and we can legally cross the river here in Portland and be able to legally possess marijuana, and soon we'll be able to legally buy it. I don't think we should be sending our tax dollars into Washington's coffers. I think we have a lot of public programs here in Oregon and jobs in Oregon that we can keep here.
You touched upon those two initiatives. Can you kind of explain those in depth a little bit?
Sure. One of them is a constitutional amendment to allow the right for adults to possess, use, and grow marijuana to be added to the state constitution. It also allows the state to regulate it. The other one is a revision of last year's Measure 80, which would tax and regulate the sale of marijuana to adults over 21.
What did you learn from the failure of Measure 80?
We learned to make certain that the composition of the newly appointed Cannabis Commission is nonpartisan and not slanted toward anyone in the nascent marijuana industry. So we have all the members of the newly created Oregon Cannabis Commission appointed by the governor. So it won't be some people from the industry. That was a mistake in our last drive. We also have put a limit on the amount people can possess and grow for personal use without a license to match what the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program allows medical patients to have today.
Have you had any discussions with the governor about this at all, about his role in this Cannabis Commission?
You know, I have not directly had any conversations with the governor.
Anybody else you know that's talked to him and how he feels about this?
I'm not sure how he feels about it. You know, the governor doesn't have to sign a referral to the people. If the legislature passed a referral to the people, it goes directly there. You know, back in 1997, the Oregon legislature moved to criminalize the simple possession of marijuana. Oregon was the first state to decriminalize that in '73, and the governor signed that recriminalization bill into law. And we had to do a referendum to stop that from going into effect. And in fact, we won every county in the state and got 67% of the vote to stop the recriminalization of possession of less than an ounce of marijuana. So his history on marijuana is sketchy. You know, there's a lot of talk about the governor being a closet smoker back in the 70s and 80s. I've met a number of people who claim they have imbibed with Governor Kitzhaber.
No, we certainly have no proof of that, but it'd be interesting to get his point of view on what his role in this cannabis commission that you talk about.
Yeah.
I want to ask you something else. You know, of course it passed in Washington and Colorado. It's now legal. Marijuana is in those states. What'd you learn from those elections?
The laws up there were drafted and had a lot of financial backing in advance, and we've learned to bring in some of these outside groups that didn't support us in the last election, and they're behind us this time. We've, in fact, they're partially funded the poll that we just did that showed 63% of Oregon likely
Did you
voters.
commission that poll? Who did? You guys did?
Yeah, we did, along with the Drug Policy Alliance.
Okay, there's obvious concern from legislators and the public, as you well know, about what the federal government will eventually do to Washington and Colorado, states that legalized marijuana in the last election. In fact, we have a question from Representative Wally Hicks on that particular issue. Listen to this.
How the federal government is going to approach Oregon's law and Oregon's posture if his ballot measures do get passed. I think any marijuana policy, legislation, or ballot measure needs to first consider the federal government's posture towards marijuana and be crafted around that. The federal government is very difficult to predict right now in terms of how they're going to go with marijuana.
You know, they're nervous about that in Colorado and Washington as well. When
Certainly.
will the Fed step in? If they step in, I think they probably will at some point. Aren't you concerned about that at all?
Well, certainly. You know, our initiative was specifically drafted to deal with the federal supremacy issue. The laws in Washington and Colorado were not. The federal government hasn't done anything in the 6 months since that election, though. In fact, several former heads of the Drug Enforcement Administration said 3 months ago if they didn't move within a month, it would be too late. Well, it's been 6 months since the election, and the state governments in Washington and Colorado have done a lot to move forward in regulating and taxing the sale of marijuana. It's already legal for over 5 months for people to possess it, and in Colorado they can legally grow their own now.
You think every day, every week that goes by, the folks in Washington, Colorado go, we may just make this?
Well, I think so. I also think that you know, when the Democratic Party gets behind marijuana legalization, just as FDR built a huge coalition when he ended alcohol prohibition, the Democratic Party has the opportunity to build another huge coalition when they get behind marijuana legalization. I think that President Obama knows that he might have lost Colorado if he'd gone against the initiative there, and he knows that his base supporters are in favor of marijuana legalization. So I'm very hopeful that the government will allow these states to act as, you know, the proverbial laboratories of democracy.
We asked K2 Facebook followers their thoughts on whether to legalize marijuana. This comment comes from Marianne Lane. Marijuana, she says, should be legalized, taxed, and hemp should be grown as a crop. Lots of new revenue and take the money out of the drug dealers' hands. Do you honestly think, though, Paul, the black market won't exist if marijuana is legal? Won't people still try and find the cheapest source here?
Well, you know, you don't see many people growing their own tobacco, and though some people make their own beer, we still have a multi-billion-dollar industry doing that. But, you know, this writer is right. Hemp is going to dwarf the drug market. Hemp for fuel, fiber, and food is going to be a multiple of what the marijuana market is, and it will, once we legalize it, we'll put Oregon on the cutting edge of some exciting new environmentally beneficial development.
A lot of people feel it's inevitable that Oregonians will, in fact, agree to vote to legalize marijuana. Is that really good for the state? Is that what we need right now?
I think so. I think.
Tell me why.
Because, you know, I think marijuana is a the issue upon which the future of freedom really hinges. That if we don't allow people to use this relatively harmless substance, the future of freedom could be dire. We need to give people the right to think the thoughts and feel the way they want to. And I think that marijuana legalization will create an economic boom here in this state, and we'll see environmentally sustainable changes with hemp fuel, fiber, and food.
But you
and
have
that'll be
folks who say-
beneficial not just for the people of Oregon, but for the whole world.
You have folks who say, okay, let's legalize marijuana. What's next? Is crack next? What, heroin after
no.
that? I mean, a lot of folks consider this a gateway drug, marijuana, and are concerned about that.
Well, you know, it's a gateway to the black market. So when you take marijuana out of the black market, that gateway will close, and there will be a lot less people looking for those other drugs. I really believe that.
A major concern about marijuana is the impairment issue. Salem resident Christy Wood would like you to answer this question. Listen to this one.
I guess we need to figure out how, like drunk driving laws, you know, how we deal with folks that are under the influence of the marijuana.
That's certainly a concern up in Washington right now.
Certainly.
How do you test for driving under the influence of marijuana?
There are saliva tests, mouth tests that can tell whether you've inhaled cannabis recently, and certainly a blood test is the best way to tell the presence of active marijuana in your system.
Paul, is that what we need, though? Do we need all these people out there on the roads now that have been smoking
We already
pot?
have it. It's already there, and we need to regulate it and take it out of the hands of the kids and substance abusers and the black market and put it in the hands of the state where it's regulated and produces a public benefit, and it can be truthfully researched, and we can educate our youth about the truth about marijuana instead of the myths about it.
So you're saying it's already happening anyway? Let's regulate this stuff.
That's right. Prohibition obviously hasn't worked, and we need to regulate it and tax it. And by allowing hemp to return to the place it is previously held in our economy, we'll be creating an untold multitude of jobs.
What kind of, do you think this sends a good message to the kids, though? That's the big question. Here's Representative Andy Olson again with a question pertaining to that.
How is he going to address the ability to prevent youth from accessing this right now, when Oregon's the leading state in the nation right now for 8th graders smoking cigarette tobacco? It's not much more of a step for that also being accessed for marijuana, even though we say it's prohibited. How are you going to stop that?
There you go. And you say?
We will create new penalties that treat people who sell marijuana to youth as criminals, as felons. People who provide it to youth will be punishable by jail term, and there'll be a fine for children, people under the age of 21, possessing or attempting to obtain cannabis, so $250 under our regulatory model.
One of the concerns I hear from parents is, I've been teaching my child since they were born that drugs are not good. Stay away from drugs, don't smoke pot. Now all of a sudden I've got to tell them why it's okay.
Well, the same thing's been true with alcohol and tobacco. And those other drugs are out there. In fact, kids have easier access to marijuana than they do with alcohol. They all will tell you that because it's regulated and taxed, and they have to show an ID for that. So currently, the kids are selling it in the high school. In fact, that's how I first tried it. So it's not out of the schools until we regulate it out of the schools.
Well, we will be following this very, very closely, as I know you will too, Paul. Always good to see you, sir. And you're confident at this point it will be?
I'm very confident that we're going to put this on the ballot for a vote. We're hopeful that the legislature will do it either in this session or in the special session next year. But if they don't, we're ready to put 2 initiatives on the ballot.
And you think they'll pass?
We think so. Our polls are showing that 83% of Oregonians think marijuana legalization is inevitable, and 64% of Oregonians are in favor of taxing and regulating marijuana now.
We shall see what happens. Paul, thanks for being with us.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it very much. We switch topics and we come